It was on these breezy hills of Cameron Highlands that the Russell family started Plantations in 1929. As the homegrown tea company celebrates its 90th anniversary this year, we sat down with Executive Chairman Caroline Russell, sorting out the tea leaves, peering into the past and contemplating the future as she seeks to take the company to greater heights.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for joining us on the show. And certainly a momentous year for Plantations, celebrating its 90th anniversary, and you recently became the executive chairman. Tell us about your journey. Did you always know that you'll be in the family business?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to join the show, Cynthia. No, I don't think I knew that from the outset. Of course, it is a family business, and as a young person, I had an involvement. I was brought along to meetings and, of course, visited the estates. But I can't say that I always knew that I would join the business, or indeed at one point, have such a big role in it. When I finished university, my father, who was the chairman at the time, did suggest to me that I should be joining the business. I was a little hesitant. He said, "Come and join the business for 2 years, Caroline. Learn all about it." So I negotiated with him and said, "I'll come and join for a year, and we'll see how it goes." But 1 year has turned into quite a few more.
Well, Plantations is, of course, the biggest tea producer in Malaysia. So much so that when you mention Cameron Highlands and Plantations, they are somewhat synonymous in terms of the origins of tea drinking culture among Malaysians. So help us understand consumption profile of your customers. Who are your target market, and really, what are we drinking? What kind of tea are we drinking?
Absolutely. Well, of course, Bo is a Malaysian brand, and we're really very, very proud of our Malaysian heritage. And going back in time, when it was perhaps not that popular, to be a Malaysian brand, people felt, well, being Malaysian wasn't quite a high enough standard, and wanted to Malaysians preferred imported brands. So even going back at that time, we still felt that we wanted to announce and be proud of our Malaysian heritage. And I think there are a number of reasons for that, because tea is very much about where it's grown. The characteristics of a tea depend on where it's grown, and Malaysia's always had a very strong and good reputation for its agricultural produce. So we felt that we had a very good reason for being proud of our Malaysian heritage. But what about consumers? Well, they're big tea drinkers. All Malaysians drink tea. And what I mean by that is the main segmentation in Malaysia is actually based on race. One doesn't like to talk about race too much in Malaysia, but in reality, the key lines of differentiation are racial, because tea is such a cultural product, and it stems from your cultural heritage. So Malays are big tea drinkers. They're probably one of the bigger consumer groups. Indians are big tea drinkers, and Chinese are big tea consumers. But there are differences about how each group consumes it and what their profiles are like. So the Chinese community tends to drink tea without milk, tends to drink it without sugar. So they need to have a profile that is what they call smoother. That's actually the term that the Chinese community will tend to use. They want a smooth tea, but they want to have it with flavor. Malay drinkers, on the other hand, drink with milk, not typically fresh milk, maybe sweetened condensed milk or an evaporated milk. So they need to have something quite robust to be able to carry the milk. So they need lots of color, they need lots of strength, and they need plenty of taste, which is of course what we call Ummph. But that makes it very suitable for drinking it in that way. And the Indian community are also very large tea drinkers. Of course, they're not such a big segment of Malaysia's population, but they're probably the heaviest tea drinkers of all.
We're seeing right behind us here, there's tons of range of tea products, from tea leaves to convenient 3-in-1 mixes. So I see some oat blended tea as well. So let's talk about trends, right? What kind of trends are you seeing in the consumer market for tea beverages?
So two major trends are taking place. One is around convenience and the other is health and wellness. So the first one about convenience is you're seeing a big shift taking place from people using loose leaf tea, which was made in teapots, and you need more time and you have, of course, tea leaves to dispose of afterwards, shifting away from that into tea bags, but even shifting away from tea bags into mixers, which are very quick and easy to prepare. The mixers, of course, you don't have to find additional sugar, you don't have to find the milk source, it's merely pouring hot water onto an instant tea. So that kind of transition is taking place into more and more convenience products. The converse to that partly is wellness. So people are becoming more concerned about their sugar intake, which they should, and also taking things that are good for their health. So arising from that, you're seeing in growth in green tea consumption and lower sugar products. One of the challenges, I think, is that while Malaysians say they're more interested in health, that when you consumer test products, for example, 3-in-1s, they do still have very sweet teeth. So getting the sugar balance right, it can be difficult. You want to be able to lower the sugar contents for health reasons. However, if you don't make it sweet enough, people don't like it. So this, as a producer, makes it difficult to get the balance right.
So the government recently implemented the sugar tax in July. Has that in any way affected Bull Plantations?
Not directly, because at this point in time that is principally covering ready to drink. But we are very cognizant of that, and we are very supportive of this government directive. So we have been looking very hard at how do we reduce our sugar levels. And quite a number of our products are kurang manis. And we have been looking at sugar replacements.
Like stevia?
And stevia. So stevia is our preferred route. The reason for that is it's an all-natural product. It doesn't have some of the connotations of some of the artificial sweeteners. However, stevia, is quite a tricky material to work with because it can leave a bitter aftertaste. So again, you have to get your formulation right so that consumers still love your product.
Speaking of consumer loved products, we've seen trends like bubble tea. We've seen kombucha, and we also been seeing more matcha tea in the market. Has that in any way impacted or affected Bull in terms of your production? Are you seeing that you're moving towards that trend as well?
So certainly in terms of green tea, yes. Matcha, we have a number of matcha-based blends. And that is a growth area, green tea and matcha. We have a green tea latte that has matcha based in it. We're not in the out-of-home sector. So the out-of-home sector is where you're seeing this big development in the bubble tea category. We've noted some shifts and changes even within that category. But it clearly is still a growing and developing one. We have examined opportunities to do that into our kind of retail products, but being able to deliver the taste that consumers want with a pre-made product at this point in time hasn't been possible.
Let's talk a bit about competition, right? What are and who would you say is Bo's biggest competitor at the point?
So we are primarily black tea, or sometimes called in Malaysia English tea producers. We primarily grow black tea. So the main contenders within that market are Unilever. Unilever would be our single biggest competitor. However, there are more than 100 brands in the black tea category. So it is quite fragmented. There are a lot of different players looking at different segments of the black tea. For example, a big category that perhaps consumers are not so familiar with is the branded dust. We call it branded dust. I see a look of question on your face there, yeah. Cynthia. But basically into coffee shops. So teh tarik in coffee shops is a huge segment of the Malaysian market. Very large volumes of tea are sold into coffee shops to help make Malaysia's favorite drink. And that's quite an important category for us too. The product we use is called dust. Dust sounds a little strange, it sounds a little derogatory. It's not. What we mean by dust is that it's a very fine particle size. And that very fine particle size means that you can brew a very strong tea, which of course you need for teh tarik.
Bo is of course one of the few tea companies in the world that not only plant, harvest their own tea, you also produce and market your own products. That works to your advantage in terms of maintaining the quality of your tea, but at the same time that also requires high production and labor cost. How are you insulating the company in terms of rising competition, and tea prices have been on the have been more subdued, I would say, in the past 2 years?
Right. Well, I think you've really hit the nail on the head with that question. We see that being a tea grower is both a tremendous asset to us as a company, but it is also presents a separate set of challenges. Why is it an asset? I mean, first of all, it's an asset because, as you say, we can control our own quality. But I think it's a little bit more than that. I think that provenance is a key reason and will become increasingly important to consumers. Where
the brand story?
I mean a little bit more than brand story. What I mean is knowing where your products come from. So as people become more concerned about food safety and food security, where did this come from? And rather than it being totally unbeknownst in a massive global supply chain, understanding where something was grown, who grew it, what were the conditions that were used, not just from an environmental perspective and a food manufacturing perspective, but also in terms of what the ethics of the company, what kind of agrochemicals were used, were the people treated correctly. So these things are becoming increasingly important to consumers.
And it's more moving towards that direction because, like you said, customers want companies to behave. They want to know the source of the product. They want it to be fair trade, zero plastic.
Absolutely.
We're looking at that.
So I think sustainability is part of our DNA. Coming from a plantation company, one has to look long term, and we are reliant on the land. We have to ensure our soils are sustainably used. We have to ensure our water supplies are clean and good. So, and planting a tea tree, you're looking at least 7 years before you start to see a return on that planting. So we have a very long-term perspective as planters. So, understanding the environment in which we operate is already there. So I wouldn't say that it's something that we're moving to. I think it's already a core part of us.
Well, planters in Malaysia are facing the squeeze with the introduction of minimum wage of 1,100 ringgit, plus with the government wanting to reduce dependency on foreign workers. How has that affected Bull Plantations' long-term strategy? Because I know that your plantations primarily are still worked by a lot of foreign workers,
yes.
right?
As I said, it's both this asset, it's also a challenge, and you've really highlighted the challenge we're in a very labor-intensive industry, that wages are rising, and there are severe labor shortages. So how do we tackle those issues? The first is, how do we become much more productive? And we have been, and this is not a new issue, this has been the last 20 years, labor shortages and rising wages. So we've worked very, very hard at raising productivity levels. We've been able to shift the number of kilos that a person per day can harvest from, say, a maximum of 40 to over 200 kilos per day. We've implemented changes like aerial application of fertilizer because manually applied fertilizer is very difficult. We're starting to look at drone technology and how can we use drones, both in terms of monitoring field health and also to look at application. We want to start to look at, and we're at an infancy stage of looking at drones to do plucking. So even to be able to replace manual harvesting. But that is still quite a long-term project. But I'm optimistic we will be able to develop something in that arena. The other thing is being able to add value to our product. That if we are going to continue to compete at the low end of the market where prices are very low, we're never going to be able to ensure that we can pay people more and more. We need to pay people more and more. There's a rising cost of living, there's a wage inflation, and we have to pay much more than minimum wage. If we're only prepared to pay our harvesters minimum wage, we won't have any harvesters. So we do need to be able to look at how do we add value to our product so that we are able to ensure that continuous wage inflation. And that really moves us to premiumization and moving Bow further and further down the value chain, or up the value chain, I think.
Well, let's talk about premiumization. That seems to be the trend in the tea market. How is Bow moving towards that? I know you have some products which are catered to the more premium market, but when you talk about that segment, you have big brands, for example, Twinings, TWG, Tazo, brands which have a really strong brand story, and that, like you mentioned earlier, Malaysians, they tend to look highly upon brands from the outside rather than looking into what we can offer as Malaysians.
So I think we have work to do. The first thing is, of course, about product. And, we absolutely have products that can compete in that sector. And a number of years ago, we put out our garden teas. These are gourmet teas. That when we've had them tested by international tea tasters, the feedback that we get is superb. I spoke earlier about provenance. I think that particularly at the gourmet end, people do want to know where does it come from. And all of those things I mentioned about sustainability and ethics. So the brands that you've mentioned, we have a major competitive advantage over them in that none of them have their own tea gardens. They are all simply buyers of tea and market it. They are marketing companies alone. So I do feel we have this very significant advantage over them. In terms of marketing, I do believe we have, work to do. We need to be able to build that reputation. You know, Bow Plantations has essentially been a mass market brand. It has been the area where we have competed in. Shifting a brand from that mass market positioning into a premium sector. I think you'll talk to lots of marketing gurus and they'll say can't be done. We ourselves had looked at, you know, whether you should be developing a separate brand, sub-brands, lots of different ideas on that. But I feel the brand story is around Bow, and to grow and create another brand, I feel is a duplication, and it really is, you know, necessary for us to be able to communicate these advantages that we have.
Which you have already been exporting to the US market, but not China yet.
China we have exported in small quantities. We've previously been looking at the retail trade in China, and now we're working with a new partner looking at e-commerce.
What would you say are the real challenges in branding Malaysian tea in the international markets?
It's unknown. Malaysia is not a recognized tea producer. In a global scale, we are a tiny, tiny little tea producer. You know, the mammoths, of course, are India, China, some of the African nations like Kenya. Indonesia is a very big tea grower. So in a global perspective, we're just a tiny little fish in a very big ocean. So we have no reputation as a tea grower. And secondly, Malaysia itself isn't always that well known. I think if we're looking at the US market, you know, many Americans would not be familiar with Malaysia. They'll have a sort of vague idea about Southeast Asia, but you know, what do they know about Malaysia? So that, I think, is our number one challenge. But I do think that on the converse side is also an opportunity, because we can look at a sort of exoticism as a speciality.
So moving forward for Bow Plantations, you talked about how you want to tap into more on the premium segment. Within Malaysia, how are you planning to do that in terms of marketing strategy?
So I think that is still something that we're working on. You know, we have brought out quite a number of new products into that category. What has been challenging is, of course, you know, driving awareness for them, you know, getting trial. Once we've had trial, we have no problem. We've had a wonderful repeat, but of course it is awareness and also getting the positioning right. So those are some areas where we know we still have work to do.
So you think Malaysians will pay a premium for
Not all Malaysians, not all Malaysians. You know, I have to say that I continue to be shocked when I go into some of the shopping malls and see luxury brands, and you see how much people pay for luxury in Malaysia. Malaysians pay for luxury. You only have to go into some of these coffee shops. I went into one myself the other day, and you know, for 2 lattes ended up paying 30 ringgit. So if 2 lattes are going to cost me 30 ringgit, buying a canister of tea that will make you 30 cups for 40 ringgit is still great pricing. So you know, there is a large portion of the Malaysian market that spends money on food and beverage, let alone other luxury items.
What keeps you excited about the business?
What keeps me excited?
About the tea industry?
I think that, first of all, it is a category where we know we're not doing any harm. Now, what I mean by that is, you know, I did think there are some FMCG, you know, one isn't always certain that, or in some categories, let's put it this way, they have a knock-on effect to people's health. So we're not in a category, and that quite the converse. You know, tea is a major source of antioxidants, and there's a lot of scientific evidence that drinking tea is generally good for your health. So that, I think, is a good point. And I think what otherwise excites me is that Bo is in a position where we can help fulfill our core purpose. So our core purpose, which sounds very grand, of course, is improving lives. And looking at that, we look at various different groups there. Of course, our consumers, by having a product that is beneficial. Of course, the people who have been with us. And it was, very rewarding for me, and also made me feel very proud when we, in conjunction with our 90th anniversary, recently highlighted some of the people behind the scenes of Bo, the people that we call our unsung heroes. So they don't have the big fancy jobs, they don't sit in front of TV cameras, but they are the heart and soul of the company. And it was really very touching to be able to interview some of these people, some of whom have worked, for the company much longer than I have, and I've been here forever and ever. And of course, also looking at the wider community and how does, Bo give back to the wider community. And we've really looked at two key areas, one on the performing arts, and the other around the environment. And being able to, move the dial a little in those areas, I think gives one a sense of purpose.
All right. Thank you so much, Caroline, for being on this interview, doing this interview and being on this show with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you.